Welcome, everybody. This is Axel Merk, President and Chief Investment Officer of Merk Investments. I welcome everybody. I haven't had a chance to do these sessions in several weeks and thought today is a great day to catch up now that 2020 is wrapping up, or so I thought. Little did I know when I tweeted that the big news of the quarter is that it's the last quarter of 2020. We obviously had significant headlines. A lot of stuff has happened in the markets, in our business, in my private life, so to speak, as well, in many different areas. So I thought it's a good time to catch up and let folks know of what's happening and so forth. And so maybe starting with the immediate, since I do sometimes a market rundown, we had the news of the president testing positive last night. S&P futures fell on that 1% or so, have since recovered more than half of that. A lot of stuff has happened. And so now maybe starting with the election, right? The prediction markets have indicated that the outcome is clearer, meaning that we will have a result for the election sooner than previously anticipated. That may in part be due that the odds of on the betting markets, the odds of a Biden victory have increased, and so the question is really, what does it mean, right? What are the policies going to be as far as the markets are concerned if we have either one? President Trump, in the debate, he didn't use that as an opportunity to lay out a plan as to what his policies are going to be in the next administration. But let's assume for a moment that he will be reelected. If that is the case, my best guess is he's going to continue to do what he has been doing, which means rule by executive order, which means that's going to be a easing of regulatory burdens, maybe not substantially. So I don't think these regulatory easing moves have been all that dramatic, but that trend is going to continue. Whereas the aggressive tone towards China may well continue to elevate, especially if Trump will blame China for him personally getting sick. We'll have to see how that plays out. I think the last word hasn't been said on that, because the one thing we do know while Trump is in isolation is he'll have access to Twitter, and he will be able to direct his campaign from there, so to speak, assuming he's healthy enough to do that. On the Biden presidency, and I'll talk about China here more in a moment, but on the Biden presidency, if we do get that, there's a lot. I mean, Biden has been called a moderate, but there's a lot on fiscal expansion that's in the program. And by the way, just on the fiscal expansion side, Trump is all for a stimulus package as well. And so I would think a fiscal expansion is quite likely. If there's one thing you get Congress to agree on, is spend money. Now, obviously, right now the gridlock is whether the money will be spent to subsidize the states or in other ways, and so that's why it doesn't appear too likely that we have some sort of stimulus package in the short term. But more broadly speaking, a Biden presidency, he may get control of the Senate as well, or Democrats may. Prediction markets now are leaning towards that, and so it will really depend on whether there's going to be a filibuster-proof majority or not, and if not, whether the Democrats will honor the filibuster. Biden had previously said that he is in favor of keeping the filibuster in place. He did not confirm that during the debate that we had this week, and so that is in the open. And so, if he does not, if he adheres to the filibuster and does not have sufficient majority in the Senate, then similarly Biden would have to rule by executive decree, and so we'll see this back and forth that we see every 4 or 8 years, I suppose, and we'll make changes at the fringes, but nothing too substantial. But again, the one thing the Republicans and Democrats appear to be able to agree on is stimulus, and especially since they have gotten a taste of how easy it is to print money these days, how much the Fed is cooperating. And I attended a presentation that was sponsored by the Hoover Institute yesterday that had a debate on the on the new Fed policy, and the main criticism really is that it is not very well defined. It models communication. It puts the stakes much higher for the Fed to be credible, and they don't really have a plan on how to get there. They've never really explained why inflation wasn't reached, and so forth. They do downplay the significance of employment in the policy, but they haven't really raised anything else in profile instead. And so it makes the policy much more difficult. Um, Obviously, also one of the big concerns is that the support of the fiscal side that's been substantial. And now I'm extrapolating it. This wasn't discussed there. Um, the big challenge is both Republicans and Democrats now know that the Fed could be there, will be there, if indeed the big stimulus package happens. Um, Republicans and Democrats appear to be okay with a major infrastructure spending program, and Democrats in particular would love to give a lot of money to the states. I'm not trying to make a judgment here of whether these are necessary, but we are in an environment where these very big spending packages are quite more likely to pass, at least. And you'll find some sort of compromise where ultimately you give everybody a pet project to get things done. And one thing that's very different in my view from 2008 is that the sort of stimuli we have are more directly affecting the consumer, which I suppose is good in one way because it gets them to spend, but on an inflationary front, isn't so great. Now, we have a Fed that's not thinking about inflation. With that, they have a commitment to keeping inflation low, um, but to keeping rates low, and they have said they want inflation to go up to beyond 2%. Um, Now, as somebody at the Fed pointed out a few days ago, um, this already matters if and when the economy picks up in earnest, because right now there's very little threat on kind of bigger inflation happening. But let's get traction, and then if the Fed is really committed to that, then who knows how the dynamics will play out. We don't know what the Fed really has in mind, except to say that they want to stay put until inflation is high. And so if that's really the case, tighten your seatbelts because we might get interesting markets. In the meantime, bonds haven't really moved much in recent weeks. By the way, bonds rallied. That's 10-year I'm referring to overnight on the positive test news for Trump, and then bonds have since come down. Currently, we're down 6 ticks on the 10-year. And 20 ticks on the 30-year. I hesitate because the board now has a 20-year as well. That didn't used to be the case. Um, and but we're still very, very range bound. And so what that means in practice for the markets is that when you have the long term pretty much fixed, you have the short term kind of fixed. And so where's the information you get from the market? And what's been happening is we had this risk off environment. Um, and basically that means the market thinks the glass is half empty. That was in conjunction with the idea that we may not get a stimulus anytime soon, which means that long-term growth prospects come down. But at the same time, if kind of if the 10 years kind of glued to the wall, what it means is that in a risk-off environment, the perception of real interest rates actually goes up, because if less is happening, well, then the real interest rates go up. And so that is one of the reasons why the dollar strengthens in that sort of environment, why gold went down. Now, obviously, you have to think about how this is going to play out. My best guess is we're going to have an election. We're going to know who's going to be the winner, and at some point we're going to start getting this economy back in shape. May not get in shape as quickly as some people want, but as there's bad news coming out, obviously, on some fronts, there's going to be an underlying healing. I can argue about the speed of that and so forth and how that's going to take place. But we'll figure out how to work with this virus. And so that also means that, in my view, real interest rates will come down again as the economy starts picking up and the Fed is committed to the 0% policy. And so in some ways, you could think of that as a buying opportunity if you wanted to kind of play that in some ways. But I have to point out, here we go, there's my disclosure, that this is not investment advice, and please do to make sure that none of what I say is considered to be investment advice. Good. With that disclaimer out of the way, let's talk China here a little bit. Last several months, I've been doing quite a bit of reading again. When I read, it's mostly audiobooks. I just don't have the time to sit down with books, although there are some books I've been reading actually offline as well. But most of the time it's audiobooks, and been disappointed by some of the recent books that have come out. The Bob Woodward book I read as well. I do try to read books from all sides on the political spectrum. And what I did not, there's obviously very interesting tidbits in there. What I don't like is the journalist telling me how I have to interpret something. Um, Good journalists report, and they obviously always have a bias in what they pick, and that's all fair and square. But Bob Woodward, in his book, every statement, and even more so through the book, he tells us how we have to interpret what the president says. And I consider myself, I'm not always right, but I have my own opinions. And so I would like to be entitled to draw my own conclusions from these things. And a lot of what the president says is obviously self-evident. But so that got tiring. But now I'm reading a book by McMaster, and what's very refreshing about it is that he doesn't talk about all the dirt that's come up during his time in the administration. What he talks about is policy. He talks about national defense policy and criticizing both the left and the right about the shortcomings of the last several decades. He talks about the threats we should be facing. He talks about how we have to, he calls it strategic empathy, how we should put us into the shoes of the other party, how the Chinese are thinking, how the Russians are thinking, and whatnot, and more comprehensively than just on the military side, what sort of actions are they taking? Now, McMaster is painting a pretty bleak picture. I don't agree to everything that he says, but his way of thinking about it has to be taken seriously because it is rising in importance, and basically he is alleging that be suspicious with doing business with anything that's related to China, any Chinese person, the social scoring model that they have. And it's very sophisticated. If you don't behave on a social and tweet something or do something that's wrong, not only will your social score be impacted and your opportunities in business and government and private life are going to be impacted, but so will all your friends' scores will be impacted, which means there is a network pressure to oblige to be with the system. He says that there's Chinese law that every business has to work with the government, and so you cannot trust companies like Huawei. And by extension, he also talks about the academic life, that in academia you really can't trust anybody, with the think tanks and behind it. Now, then he wants to have it both ways and says that one of the better things we can do is invite Chinese students and show them the good side, so to speak, and tell them how the kind of the free world is working, and we have to strengthen our institutions and whatnot. That's all fair and square. What I'm concerned about, of course, is that this will create an isolationism that's going to hurt everybody, including the US as well, that it will create another center. Chinese are strong enough, smart enough, powerful enough to create their own center. Obviously, the system has shortcomings, but I do think that's going to create some challenges. I'm just throwing out there as an alternative way to think about it. If one has, which I think is a very valid concern, that if we buy equipment, any equipment really, that is connected to the internet, which everything is, how do we ensure that equipment is safe? And how do we ensure that it's safe if it's connected to critical infrastructure? But everything is kind of critical these days, right? I mean, it's you've seen that when satellite dishes go down, you suddenly can't get gas at the pump anymore because the credit card verification doesn't work. I mean, that's, many of you have experienced that, I trust. And of course, similarly, we have so many connected devices. If somebody just in Russia or somewhere else pulls a switch and many devices stop working, we have a challenge. And so I would think the more helpful approach is that there's going to be a lot of emphasis on standards, on protocols that are transparent, maybe making code available and so forth. And that sort of approach will provide a more robust testing. And we cannot just kind of putting everybody who is one ethnic group or one nationality under suspicion, I think can only lead to bad things, and it's not really going to solve the problem. So instead, if we, in many industries, we have that in different ways. I mean, it's the same thing on the social media platform. We love to blame the social media about all the bad things that are coming out of it, but the politicians are too much chicken to actually regulate it. And so and obviously part of it is in this case it's free speech. How do you regulate that? How do you make sure that people are responsible? But instead of giving some guidance of what is appropriate and sending appropriate policy, it's much easier to just complain about the bad guys. And depending on whether you'll find plenty of examples on whether the left or the right does behave badly. And all of that is just a screaming match unless we have some decent policy to actually put these into more better channels. And then, especially when it comes to national security, I do think that there's plenty of evidence that transparency is helpful. The entire open source community lives on that. When you say what you do in public, when you have the protocols published, then you can test and the robustness. How good is it against attacks? How good is it, and so forth. And so, my own view is that should be where the focus is. But in any case, I'm just chiming in on that. Let me pivot here, talk about California briefly. We do have wildfires. We have personally been affected by those. We do have a place in Carmel Valley. We were extremely fortunate in that the damage we've had is limited compared to what many others have experienced. And the great thing about it is that the community and the many communities that we see are really pulling together. You really see of what these communities are made of when you have many people help and with one another. Obviously, the firefighters have been doing a tremendous jobs, and similarly, of course, other first responders, police, and others. And one group that doesn't get enough credit, let me give them a shout out here, is PG&E field workers. We all love to complain about PG&E, about everything that they mess up. Well, the field workers are first class. Just speaking about my own experience in Carmel Valley, they rebuilt the electric grid in that greater area within days. They had teams. Some people are cutting trees, putting up new poles, flying in wires by helicopter. They were just swarming out, had staging grounds that are second to none. An amazing job on getting power back in a reasonable period. Now, obviously, there are going to be areas where that's not going to be the case, where people are going to be complaining and whatnot. But as far as the people on the ground are concerned, they've done an amazing job. And we often take this for granted, right? I'm sitting here in front of my fancy Bloomberg terminal, and that can only work, obviously, when there's power. I've learned a lot about, we do have solar panels down there and whatnot, and learned a lot about living completely off the grid and switching between power and off the grid power, getting well pumps to work in this sort of environment when there's no power. Lots and lots of interesting things one can learn onto how to live off the grid with an experience like this. So my weekends have certainly been busy. Now, of course, I look out of the window. Air quality is bad again, and having good air filtration indoors is good. Napa right now, several of the better known vineyards are being affected. It's a gut wrenching period in time. Don't want to get too much into politics of forest management. Let me just mention we were affected by what's called the Carmel fire. That was in the aftermath of the lightning storm, and that was caused by the tropical weather we had. California doesn't have tropical weather, and so when it does come in, it's a problem because we have this tropical air is moist, unstable, warm, and tends to end in thunderstorms, and we don't have that in the summer. And on rare occasions, every several years, that does happen. When it does happen, you get these breakouts of thunderstorms, and then you have 1,000 lightning strikes, and fires do come up. We do know on our property we have down there, the areas that were mowed or trees were well taken care of, we're fine. And we do have some forest there as well, and obviously that's not as well taken care of. If you have areas that weren't mowed or the branches were hanging lower, there was a very different outcome for those areas, right? And so we did have the fires come very, very close, and firefighters defended the property. They were on our property there for 2 days. It was very defendable, they said, and so there's a lot, I think, that will happen in California on defensible space, where properties will make a bigger perimeter around things to help mitigate the sort of threatened disaster that's coming. Anyway, I touched on a few areas. Let me talk about the ECB here briefly, and currency markets, since I don't do that all the time. Well, I should do that all the time, but I didn't do that in this briefing. European Central Bank came out today, Lagarde, and said, hey, maybe we should have a digital currency. Whenever I mention digital currencies, I have to give a disclaimer that these are highly speculative and whatnot. But when central banks get involved, and it's of course a different cup of tea, then suddenly you have then you suddenly have um, a government guarantor or ECB, a central bank guarantor behind it. Now, the downside of a ECB when they think about digital currency is that you could have more negative interest rates, right? If you get rid of paper currency entirely, and by the way, the Europeans got rid of checks decades ago, right? There's no physical check anymore in Europe. And so you can get rid of the paper cash as well. And if that were the case, you could have more negative rates, and that may well be a motivating factor for central banks. Noteworthy about trends in central banking, obviously we've had the Fed say that they are revising how they look at inflation. The ECB may get egged on by that. Mervyn King said yesterday, the former head of the Bank of England, when you have these review periods, there's a lot of pressure that you actually change something. You can't come out after a 1 or 2 year review and saying, hey, everything is great, we keep everything as it is. Even as sometimes doing less is more. But green bonds are more popular in Europe right now, and the Lagarde emphasizes that she has been buying green bonds. So I think we'll see ever more coercion of central banks to be activist, right? And this is clearly not monetary policy to allocate money to a specific sector, which in turn, the big negative on that is that it will attract more political scrutiny and influence that will make central banks lose their independence, and that will make monetary policy less effective. And so that will increase the cost of doing business for everybody. Just talking very abstractly, over the years I've explained these sort of topics in more depth. Back to the dollar. The dollar has been trading really as a funding currency and a carry trade. What I mean with that is when risk is on, when equities are doing well, the dollar has been weakening. When risk is off, the dollar has been strengthening. I explained that early on a little bit of how the 10 years working in the context of real interest rates. And that's been the big trend here. We have the sterling that's been a bit of a yo-yo because there's something called Brexit coming up, and that's still a big mess. Um, Yes, and let me just here, I'm just looking at my board here. What else to tell you about? Um, yeah, there's one other pet peeve I have, but I I am unfortunately, because I cannot discuss products here on this forum, um, but there's some stuff happening in the gold space that I really think everybody should know about. I'm just puzzled that the gold bugs haven't jumped on it. So if you're a gold bug, reach out to me. Well, maybe not reach out to me, but have the journalists reach out to me. Then I can communicate to maybe put this out in public in the right sort of format. But in any case, I am digressing here. Um, the S&P 500, the futures are now down 28 as I talk here on a Friday morning. Happy Friday to everybody, and I wish everybody a safe weekend. I'll wrap it up here. I hope you enjoyed me coming back here. Part of the reason I hadn't come back is that some technical difficulties. My Bluetooth headset here was phasing in and out, and I didn't feel like retaping my things, and I kind of got busy. On the work side, by the way, we have been extremely busy, and so that's, I guess, the good sort of busyness. There's a lot of stuff happening. Um, and so that's nice to see. We have some new ideas of where we want to go, what we want to do, and so forth. And so the fires distracted us a little bit. Also had some other issues that there's a lot of health management we have to do here internally. We've had no workers with COVID, but there's still some other items that do come up as life continues. Different people have different things within their lives, including good news. One of our folks had a baby, and so not everything is bad in 2020. So with that said, have a great weekend, and talk to you guys soon. Bye.